This is the Be Better Golf podcast, today with Lawrie Montague. Hi, Lawrie. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks for having me on the show, mate.
No problem. I was really interested in talking to Lawrie. I heard about him years ago from my friend Rory He, who was singing Laurie's praises right after he won a Asian Tour event, the first Indonesian to ever win on the Asian Tour. And also with me today, you guys will see Justin Tang. Justin is a teaching pro in Singapore, and he's also the producer of the Be Better Golf podcast. Hi, Justin. How are you?
Thanks, Brendan. I'm good. Thanks, Lawrie, for taking the time out to have a chat with us on all things golf.
My pleasure, Justin. Good to see you again, mate.
So the last time we met in Singapore was at some ladies amateur event. We spoke a little bit in the past about the performance paradox. There are lots of facets that a professional golfer could address to progress his game. But most of the time, it seems that pros tend to focus on technique and often come unraveled. Why do you think this is so? Why is this the case?
That's a really interesting question. And I guess that the easy answer is that the culture of golf is focused on that. And I mean literally the whole culture of the game. And it's interesting. I posted the other day, I have an extensive library of golf books going back 150 years. And I happened to post a couple of books on golf theory, swing theory from 100 years ago. And it's just, people just lap it up. They're just so interested in this idea of swinging the golf club a certain way and being able to control the flight of a golf ball over a great distance more than, say, putting or chipping or pitching or bunker shots. It's just always been that way. It's in fact, the early golf instruction books that were published really talked about the style of play and different styles. There was actually a St Andrews style versus a Carnoustie style. So the professionals in different regions were teaching different styles of swing. So I think this just goes back a long way. And when media started to get involved, the golf, golf magazines and so on, and books, I mean, they sold more books that were related to swing technique. And so to this day, 21st century, it's no different. There are literally hundreds of thousands of golf lessons, free golf lessons online on YouTube, and probably it's fair to say that the most successful instructors on social media are teaching full swing mechanics in most cases. Most people, it's like crickets if you talk about the mental side of the game or even short game. It's just, there's no real audience for it. People want to know how to swing the golf club better, and more importantly, they just want to know how to hit it better, because the vast majority of the world can't play the game very well. So they go and listen to the instructors or the professionals that are playing very well, and invariably the magazines and so on, they just focus on, if someone wins a tournament the very next month, there's probably going to be some article on that pro, and it won't be how well they chip the ball or putt the ball, even though they might be really relevant stats to the win. It'll be much more about how they swing the club and how they hit it 300 meters off the tee. So, the culture is so deeply ingrained with this idea of swing perfect, right? And I don't think it'll ever be different. Someone like me, though, I mean, I have to look at a broad spectrum of things. So technique being one, and of course I don't discount technique. I just have to look at it in a broader context with a whole lot of other factors that are involved in golfers playing a lot better.
Yeah, Lawrie is the coach, coach of the Indonesian national team, and he is deeply into the mental side of the game. But he's also a technically sound coach too. So he does both. But Lawrie, let me ask you, before we get into the mental stuff, what are the technical things that if you see something, a certain technical thing in someone's swing, you might say like, okay, mental game is important, but this is something, top of the food chain that you have to fix. This is just a technical thing that is so egregious that we have to get over this first, or maybe there's nothing.
They have to be able to hit the ball pretty well to be able to score well, but it's not the be-all, end-all. In other words, they have to be able to, hit the ball off the club face pretty much where they're aiming the club face. So that goes without saying. But the other thing is with irons, they need to strike the ball more solidly. So that means hitting it more out of the sweet spot or center of percussion of the club face, and also hitting at the right time in the golf swing, Brandon. So in other words, there's a right time and a wrong time. You can hit it too early in the swing. You can get the ground before the ball. Too late in the swing where you get the club traveling downwards too much, or at the right time, if you will, to simplify it. So, if I'm working with someone to improve their technique, I have to improve the timing of when that golf club bottoms out in a swing, and also make sure that it's lined up with where the player wants the golf ball to go. And so I guess that's the skill of teaching, is really working out what you can see, these variables that are involved that influence how the golf club would behave differently for the player. Obviously, the player's attached to it, but how the golf club would behave differently so that the ball can be struck more times in the center at the right time in the swing so that it travels more or less to the target. And then later on, I might think about, what's the potential for hitting the ball further?
What do you think are the things that keep golfers from getting better?
The most obvious one is that we're creatures of habit. So to give you a great example of how that might work, let's say someone regularly practices at a driving range. Maybe they live 15 minutes away from the driving range, but they go there 3 or 4 times a week. They'll drive the same route to the golf range pretty much most days, unless something abnormal happens. They'll drive at the same time of the day. They'll have a scheduled time of the day where they want to be there. They will have a car parking space that they like to park in before they even get to the driving range. If they don't get that parking space, they'll be a little bit annoyed because they like that car parking space. When they turn the car off and get out of the car, they'll go and do all the things they would normally do in a fairly exacting way to get their clubs out or their particular clubs, and then they'll walk and do the same thing, go and find the place where you get the golf balls, probably talk to the same kind of people who are there all the time. And so there's this universe that's created that really doesn't change that much. And then they go and look for the driving range mat that's the one they practice on most of the time. And then they get the balls and they buy the same amount of balls, and then they go through the same routines most of the time. And then they ask themselves, why aren't I getting better?
I think it's about awareness, right? Lawrie, we spoke about this. Most people know enough to think that they are correct, but not enough to know that they are wrong. I think a lot of people go through this routine of, if I practice enough, I'm going to get better. You spoke a little bit about environment earlier. Can you talk to us about playing as you practice and practicing as you play, as well as learning to play under pressure?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, let's talk about environment. Well, yeah, like I mentioned before, the environments are somewhat different, aren't they? The driving range environment to the first tee environment, or the practice environment to the performing environment, if you will. So number one, if you're spending a great majority of your time on a driving range developing something in your game, how do you know that is the thing that you need to develop to be better on the golf course, right? So you get to the first tee and maybe you are nervous. And most of the reason, look, nerves are fine. There's nothing wrong with having nerves. I guess it just depends on how you manage that. But if you never practice with them, then when you get them, you may not know how to make them fly in formation, as the old saying goes. You get the butterflies, but the whole idea is to learn how to make them fly where you want them to fly. So if you're practicing in an environment that is a low-stress environment, then you step up into a higher stress environment, of course, you're going to naturally react. That's absolutely human to do that. Now, the key becomes, well, okay, to answer your question, Justin, how do you prepare for that? Well, firstly, one of the very first things you can do on a driving range is practice your pre-shot routine before you hit golf shots. Get out of the habit of scraping and firing. Now, just to describe scraping and firing, that's not my words. They were described in a golf book by Chuck Hogan, who was an excellent golf instructor through the 80s and quite well known to old pros like myself. And he used to talk about scraping and firing a lot, that people go to a driving range and they pour their balls into the tray, and then they scrape the ball across to the club and then fire it off the range, and scrape and fire and scrape and fire and scrape and fire. And what they never do is prepare to hit a golf shot properly. They've got the repetition going, but then they get on the first tee and they don't scrape and fire. Firstly, they've got one golf ball instead of a big bucket, and two, they haven't practiced their pre-shot routine, but they go through one anyway. So they stand behind the ball, but then this behavior from behind the ball is not very consistent because it's never been practiced. So, see, the whole idea of standing behind the ball is getting ready to hit a golf shot. But if you stand behind the ball, but you've never prepared to hit a golf shot from behind the ball, then it's a new habit. So what's going to happen straight away is you're going to get found out very, very quickly, because you're now incorporating a habit of body and mind that is not consistent with what you practice every other day. So there lies the problem. Before you even get off the first tee, you have a problem in that you're trying to do something that you don't normally do. So now that is going to get in the way of all that good work that you've been doing, building a repetitive swing motion on the driving range, because you've now added this pre-shot routine that you've never practiced. Now, that's a lot of people right now, and I would say a lot of your listeners will be able to go, yep, that's me. I scrape and fire more than I do the other. Now, right now, we've got players in our program that this particular month, there's some big tournaments on, and one of the routines that I have is they have to hit 100 golf shots, 20 sets of 20 golf balls. But essentially what they do is they hit 100 golf shots with full pre-shot routine, but they have to do it without looking sideways. The only place they can look is the balls on the ground, their feet. They can look to where they're hitting the shot, but they can't look sideways. They can't look either side of them. They've literally got to stay in a little cocoon, if you will, for 100 golf shots, which is very difficult to do. And then they have to go back and work through their routine every single time. And then and we have 10 levels there. So in other words, this particular routine, they hit 100 golf shots. And to pass that routine, you actually have to do that 10 times. They'll hit 1,000 golf shots with a pre-shot routine before they get to level 2, which becomes 200 golf shots with a pre-shot routine. So the idea being that if you could think about it like this, if you imagined an inverted pyramid, and at the very top of the pyramid, the broader part, is you standing behind the ball. And you're standing behind the ball, looking down your target, and you're working out what you want to do, where you want to hit the golf ball to. Level 2 becomes walking from behind the ball to the side of the ball and connecting yourself with the golf ball. And level 3 becomes connecting the golf target to the person, the decisions being made, you're having your last looks before you execute. Level 4 would be right at the bottom of the pyramid, and the great players, the ones that are the absolute best, that level 4 is forgetting everything. They actually they go into such an altered state that they dissociate with everything that's going on. And the golf swing becomes completely automatic. It's all those conscious thoughts they're gone. Well, most people get stuck at level 3. And the reason they get stuck, in other words, they've gone behind the ball, they walked into the ball, they're connecting themselves up, but they don't get to level 4. And the reason they don't is because they scrape and fire too much, number one. Number two, the targets tend to be very consistent, and it's on a flat and level bit of driving range off, in a lot of cases, off a rubber mat or fairly perfect turf. And of course, as I mentioned, there's no pre-shot routine whatsoever. So it's going to be very hard for any player that wants to be better to get off this plateau if something quite radical, but also something that is useful to the player, in other words, would make them better, doesn't happen. But most people aren't aware, as you said, Justin. They're not even aware of it, because if you go onto YouTube and you look at instruction, it invariably starts, and I've got plenty on there, where you start from, hello, here am I standing on a range giving a lesson, and you're not really talking about how you got to that place. In other words, what would be better was, I'm here and this is my shot, and I've got a side hill lie, and I'm 120 out from the green, and I've got to play this shot. And I'm going to show you how I think about playing this golf shot. Most people aren't doing it. It's some pro standing in front of a camera on a level bit of ground telling people how to swing a golf club better. So you can see there are a lot of problems embedded in the whole culture of the game that aren't changing. They've been the same. 50 years ago it was like that, and 100 years ago it was like that. So we might be the 21st century. It doesn't change anything.
Lawrie, when you're talking about these pots of 20 balls each, in that pot of 20 balls, and this might get to a discussion a little bit about block practice versus random practice, but are people hitting a brand new shot every single ball, or are they concentrating on, like, how often are they switching targets and things like that?
It's a good question. Well, for me, when they're doing this routine that I mentioned, that's all about building a really good pre-shot routine. So what they'll do is they have one target out there and hit 20 to that target, and then their second set of balls goes to a different target, and so on. But that goal is simply to get them to be so good at their pre-shot routine that it becomes automatic. Now, when they can do that, then we start building variation in different flights, curves, etc. But I have to get people to a place, the people I work with, to a place where that pre-shot routine is so much a part of them that when they stand on that first tee, it just naturally happens. And see, most people, Brendan, are just not nearly at that place, in my experience. And as I said, I've ran golf schools for years and given thousands and thousands of one-on-one golf lessons, and I can tell you that people just don't do that. They never practice their pre-shot routine enough, probably because they don't understand the value of it.
And you've seen a big difference in players, like, say, a player that sometimes takes 20 seconds, sometimes just goes up and hits it. You've seen a big improvement when they're more consistent with their time, the shots get more consistent?
You bet. I happen to be one of the people that actually thinks this is that important, that I've tested many people, randomly when they're not even watching. I'll go out there with a stopwatch and I'd watch people on a golf course hit shots at different times in a round, and there could be as much as 5 seconds difference. Now, 5 seconds is a lot in golf. And so I would go, well, what's that 5 seconds? What does that equal? Does it equal more time thinking about your shot? Are you doing something physically different to what you did before? Does your timing get faster as you get under more pressure or slower? There are so many questions that arise. And if you look at the sports psychology literature and just general literature, not golf specific, one of the things that psychologists that focus on sports really will look at, they'll look at the preparation of the athlete prior to them executing some sort of movement, and they will look at the routine and the time that routine takes and how consistent that routine is. So if we're talking about the best in the world, they're amazing at it. They're incredible,
right?
Whether they know it or not. In other words, they don't know it. If they're the best in the world, it's just part of what they do. But you can be sure that early in the piece, their coaches were developing some specific type of pattern of movement with a signature of time that they started to develop to the stage where it was just pop, happens. Gymnastics, athletics, any level of athletics, you name it. There's this pre-execution phase where you get mind, body ready to execute. And the ultimate is obviously to get as deep into focus as you possibly can at the time you're executing the stroke. But unfortunately, the way culture is, it's because it's so much of a mechanistic approach to improvement that players, when things don't go well, go straight back to improving mechanics. So they get in this deadly cycle of execute shots, get mistakes, not happy with mistakes, get more lessons, and it spirals and spirals and spirals, and they don't move beyond that. So to answer your question a long way around, the plateau is which is called arrested development. And think about the two words, arrested development. All right, so this is like the development is kind of not moving from where it should. Well, it can't move. There's no different information. You know, you have to do something different, and you have to know something different for it to have the potential to be different. Otherwise, it'll just potentially be similar all the time.
You mentioned one word earlier, change. What's your process for taking a player through swing changes? Let's say you've ascertained, hey, you got something in your technique that's holding you back from shooting lower scores. Could be because your face too short to open at the top of the backswing. How do you go about that process of making technical changes?
For the people that watch Be Better Golf, a lot of them, I talk to so many people that they know they have a certain problem. They've been like maybe seen a couple different pros to fix the same thing. And they've been living sometimes 10 years, sometimes 25 years, knowing that they have an inside takeaway or knowing that they have an over the top swing. And they're like, oh, that's just me. I've been battling that forever. I would kill to get rid of this move, but I just can't get rid of it. So that kind of goes to exactly what Justin was asking. So if somebody has this thing that they really see and they really are convinced that it's this demon in their golf swing, what's the process to actually make a change and not just have it be something that they complain about all the time?
Okay, so there are two sides to that. The first one is making the change and then making the change work. So making the change is to alter the behavior of the body in some way so that it looks different. Okay, so some portion of the body is doing something different. The wrist might have been like this, and now it's going to be more this way. Now it's got to move from here, let's say, to here, which requires many, many repetitions and firing of certain muscles in a pathway that are consistent for a long period of time for it to move over time from here to here. It's not an instantaneous thing. If we're just moving this wrist angle from this position here to here, that amount of movement is significant. And I think it's quite often sold as being easier than it actually is. It's not easy. It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult for the brain to organize itself in such a way to focus on that, particularly if you're not staying focused on it. In other words, particularly if you're not only doing that, you're trying to hit the golf ball to the target at the same time, and you're getting very disappointed with yourself because as you think you're making this change, moving your wrist from here to here, but let's say it hasn't moved at all, but you think it has, and you're hitting poor shots, you won't do it for very long before you fire that idea and move on to something else. So the idea of people, Brandon, having an inside takeaway, let's say, for a long time, it's absolutely, that is entirely the case. Because let's just say that to make it go back a little straighter, not so much inside, would be helpful. Now, it may not be. See, that's the other thing. We don't know that just because that player takes it back straighter doesn't mean it's going to be a better thing for that particular person. But let's assume in this case it is. All right?
Like Ray Floyd, for example.
You've got to teach the golf club to move. It's obviously the person's attached to this golf club, and it requires some very specific movements, but it's not one movement, is it? There are many things going on at the same time. And maybe the coach is saying, we want the club to go back this way, but you've also got to have your body doing this. So that's two things at least. But then it might be three things. So let's say they're focusing on three things. They've almost got no chance unless they spend an inordinate amount of time doing it. Now, as long as the golf ball is flying off the club face towards some distant target, even less chance. Because the perfect environment would be to go into a studio with a white screen and no picture of a golf green in the background, just a white screen, so that you could focus your energies entirely on modifying the movement of the body. But that's not the case. The brain is being inundated with stimuli from external stimuli, a driving range, a ball in front of you. And so you're going, I want the wrist to move this much, and I've got to feel that in my swing. And maybe you're standing in front of the coach and they're talking at the same time. So now I've got the information that I've got to process from the pro, and I've got to change this physical movement, and I've got to hit the golf ball to the target. Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
Lawrie, one of the things that makes it so difficult with a lot of different golf things, movement things, is that a lot of times people have no problem doing it. You know, physically, there's no problem in doing it. And even in an air swing, no issue. Yeah. But as soon as you put the golf ball there, this especially shows itself to me with the flip at the bottom. You know, you're talking about timing earlier. Yeah. And there's something about the golf ball and something maybe about trying to hit it in the air or something, but things definitely change. You know, like it's like, hey, I can do this pattern, but I cannot do it when I'm trying to hit. So you just painted a really, good picture for us about how difficult it is. So how can we tackle this? What's our roadmap to making a positive change?
So first and foremost, you have to remove a lot of the distraction that would alter your ability or move you off path with the goal. If the goal is, for instance, to get the wrist like this, using that example, and it's a certain amount of angle that you ultimately want to get to, and it will start from here and go a little bit, and the pro has identified a certain amount that, with you that you would like to achieve. You have to take away all the other stuff around you that would get in the way of you doing that properly, which means you could do a lot of practice swings at home in front of a mirror where you're constantly getting feedback. What you wouldn't be doing in the first stages of the change is hitting golf balls. That'd be the last thing you do, because the brain by default will always go back to what it knows. So if it works in context. So if there's a ball in front of you, it goes straight into a part of the brain where the golf swing's developed, and it says, let's give me that golf swing. So irrespective of whether you were trying to get your wrist into that, position, wouldn't happen whilst ever there's a ball there. So Brandon, you have to move golf ball out of the way, and you need to work in an environment devoid of all of those extra things that the brain would be processing, and which would mean more silence. In martial arts, I've studied martial arts and a lot of training in the eastern part of the world here where I live, and a lot of things are done in silence. You remove the distractions. If it's, for instance, the Japanese have, if you're learning karate, and people listening to this who do that would understand what katas are. And kata in Japanese is form, and they learn this certain level of forms, these different types of forms. And they're done in silence. And you learn one, and then you learn another, and you learn another, and you do it all the time. And it doesn't matter whether you're a white belt or a black belt, you still do kata. Well, golfers can do the same thing. They can learn particular movements that make their golf swing better, like a kata. But to do it, they would have to have more silence, more remove the distraction, being able to focus all their energies on making that happen. And the brain is it's marvelous at learning things, as long as you can remove distraction or interference. It can learn anything, and it can learn it in very, very quickly. But the more things it has to combat in terms of the more stuff that's going on whilst the person is attempting to achieve their goal of changing the movement pattern, the harder it is and the longer it will take. And it's likely not to happen. In other words, they'll give up before they get to the end.
Something that's really popular, a topic that's really popular on Be Better Golf, is the flip impact. Somebody was on my channel talking about how this was really a big difference between the different levels of golfer, where some golfers, if the ball's here and I'm hitting this way, some golfers are presenting kind of this broken wrist and everything is leaning this way, and then other golfers are on the other side, and it's kind of a binary thing where you can control the golf ball if you're leading the club through the shot rather than having the club kind of get past you. And it speaks a lot to what you were talking about, to the timing. So a lot of people are hitting the ball too early, kind of as they're letting it pass themselves. And it definitely seems like a mental challenge more than a physical one, because if you go to give them any other kind of tool, a light sledgehammer, a baseball bat, if they go to hit a piñata, they lead everything through it very nicely. Yeah. But a golf club specifically, it gets past you. And so it seems like it's more of a mental issue than anything. What have been some of your successful ways to improve the timing in someone's golf swing to give it that, Hogan used to call it a late hit, or that kind of correct timing to have swing?
Like the shaft leaning more forward as the ball is being struck, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. What has been some of your successful ways to help people with that?
So first and foremost, I have to explain the concept to a person, not the problem. Most of the reason that people flip is because they focus on the problem and not the solution. They don't, in other words, it becomes that anti-goal I mentioned earlier. They're trying not to flip, and so they flip. It's that old blue cow thing. Don't think about a blue cow. Whoop, there's a blue cow.
Yeah, when I was obsessed with it, man, I would just try to freeze my wrist as hard as I could But that club, you swing the club fast, that thing starts weighing like over 100 pounds. You physically can't hold it back,
Yeah.
And when you're swinging at its speed, so I would end up flipping even worse as I was trying to hold it. So it is definitely that anti-goal thing you're saying.
Yeah, so I think the anti-goal part is the first thing. When you go to a really good and competent instructor, they're focusing on what you want, not what you don't want. And even if you have a language of you're describing what you don't want, they'll reframe that language or help you to reframe it. They'll say, Brendan, is there another way you could say that would help you to not do the thing that you don't want to do?
Yeah.
And you stay silent. You just wait for the person to process the question and think about that for a moment. You say, what is it that you want to do here? And then if they can demonstrate to you what you want them to do and what they actually want to do, then at least you know that they understand in their mind what they're attempting to do. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of people, if they come to you for a golf lesson or they're at one of the Be Better golf schools and you say like, okay, what are you looking for in your swing? They'll tell you, they say, oh, I don't want to be over the top, or I want to stop flipping it. And you're like, okay, so you're saying, okay, that's fine, but what do you want to do? So I said, okay, I want to hit the ball lower. I want to hit it with, less side spin. Well, I guess that's a less. I want to hit the ball lower. I want to hit it in a tighter cone. And I want, physically, I want to be kind of towing the club around the corner, I guess would be.
Yeah, and you might say, well, can you show me that golf swing that you want to make?
Right.
And then you stay silent and you watch the person go through it. And then that tells me as an instructor straight away whether the person actually understands the concept of it. And, many times they've paid for lessons and had lots of lessons and they do understand the concept.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the ball being there and they're ball bound, in other words, the ball is dictating to them how it should be hit, they break the rules. So even though they understand the concept and the idea even of, let's call it an idea, something in their head, this idea of presenting the golf club differently to the ball, when the ball is put down, the default pattern kicks in every time. The default pattern relates back to the history of the golfer first learning how to play and possibly thinking in their mind that to hit the ball in the air their own way, with using their own logic, that you have to, flip the right wrist underneath or the, whatever their trailing hand is under the golf ball to get the ball to go in the air, not really understanding how loft functions in a golf swing.
And a lot of times it seems like people can do the swing that they want to do up to about maybe 60% or so. So if it's a 7-iron, they can carry it maybe 90 yards doing what they want to do. But once they try to get power and they try to hit it further, their old problems come back. Have you seen that?
Plenty of times. I mean, I've probably seen almost. Well, I don't get surprised too much.
Sure. Yeah. So how do people get past that? It's like, okay, I know that pattern's there, but in my mind, that just doesn't feel powerful enough using that,
That's the real skill of the person that's instructing on how much of an ability they have to sell their idea to the player who might be skeptical, and is fair enough. Maybe, golf lessons aren't, not one of the cheapest things to go around and buy. So maybe that person spent a fair bit of money and is not convinced. So you're going to have to get someone who's quite skillful at being able to, change the way the person views it. It's no different to sales or anything else. You're going to get rejection. But let's say this person is skeptical, that they're going, one last time, I'm going to try this pro. I've heard this pro is really good, and I'm going to try this pro out. Well, the first thing you're going to do is test the pro.
Sure.
Right? It's going to be a test. It's going to see whether I can trust this person to help me with this problem I seem to have that I'm carrying around wherever I go, right? Wherever I go, I've got this problem. Well, the instructor might go, yes, this person has a problem because they're not opening their mind up to the possibilities of doing something different. Yes, it feels weak. Yes, all of those things. But a really smart instructor is going to tell them, this thing that you're going to do will feel weak. I guarantee you. Well, bingo, that person's going, there's a trust right there. The coach knows how I feel. See, this becomes a case of how well you can pitch your idea to someone who might be skeptical. And they've got every right to be skeptical. As if they've spent hundreds of dollars and they still flip the club, let's for instance say, and they're still hitting poor shots. Of course they're going to be skeptical. Why wouldn't they be? No one's been able to convince them yet that this idea of not flipping is a better way to do it.
Yeah.
So I might say,
sometimes intellectually they might know, but their body doesn't trust it. Like intellectually they know I shouldn't flip it, but something right at that kind of late in the swing moment does not trust that. It just throws it at it.
It's more automatic, right? It's just taking over. It's well learned.
Go ahead, Justin.
Oftentimes I realize that a lot of people, when it comes to flipping, they don't understand how to use their tool correctly. That the tool needs to be angled forward with a handle. And when they, like Brandon pointed out, without the ball, they make beautiful swings with the shaft leaning forward. But then when the ball's there, I find that a lot of times the intentions that they had during the practice swing suddenly changes. It goes from one of, okay, let's, for a lack of better term, drag the handle through the ball. Suddenly it goes, let's kill the ball. And I think a lot of people, as you said, Lawrie, are not aware of this very subtle change in the mental process. And then it shows up in the forces exerted against the club, finally expressed in the motion of the swing.
Justin, do you think that it's really, because I've studied this a lot, get your input too, Lawrie. Do you guys think with the flip, it's really a thing about the club face? Because if I have a person take, say, like a super speed stick, which weighs the same as a golf club, and hit a wiffle ball as hard as they can along the ground, man, you will see a slow motion swing of a pro golfer. It will lag and release, and it'll be just so pretty. As far as if they just have this little round nub and they're trying to whack it, and in their mind, I just want to scoot it along the ground as far as I can. But as soon as you introduce the face, which I think is, in my opinion, the original sin of golf, that they put the shaft here and then the face off the side of it. They really should have made it more like a garden hoe or something, where the center of mass and it was contiguous with the actual tool, but it's not. So, and that's what we have to deal with. What are your thoughts, Lawrie, about getting somebody to get more club face control? A lot of the players you're seeing, have developed this through playing golf as junior golfers. A lot of the players that I'm seeing at Be Better Golf Schools, they all learned, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, beyond. So that's a real big difference. Squaring the face and getting a more consistent club face through the ball. What do you think?
First and foremost, if they're in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they can still learn as equally as well as those kids can learn. It's just they don't spend as much time at it as the kids. But there's no
way someone in their 20s, 30s, or 40s could be an equally good learner as someone that's like prepubescent. I mean, that's the traditional mindset. I wouldn't. Sure. That would blow my mind to learn that would be true.
Yeah, the research is pretty solid.
Really,
in this day and age, on people being able to learn through till you're in your very, like me, getting grey and what have you, you can still learn.
But you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Oh, that's right, of course, yeah. But humans aren't dogs, and education isn't tricks.
Okay.
Right, it's just education.
Yeah.
And people, it might have been out of school for a while, and maybe they didn't have a very good experience at school. Maybe they struggled at school. And so a good instructor is going to ask more questions to get an understanding of the person standing in front of them, and what does that person truly want that would make them happy. And that's a meaning level. Right? We go from this surface level semantics, the blah, blah, blah of just talking, to what does the person deeply want that would make them feel happier and more satisfied in their game. And if it's to hit the ball more solidly off the club face, so be it. It can be done. You could be 70 or 80 and learn to do that. It's not a challenge. We're not dealing with old dogs and tricks. We're definitely not, Brendan. And I know you meant that in the right way, but it's true. That is, we're dealing now with plasticity, the ability of the brain to continually evolve and adapt and learn. right? That's what current education tells us. Right through till you stop, till it's the end of your days.
Mm-hmm.
You can continue to learn. And so you need the people to come to you that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s to believe that you're the school, the one place that you can come to, the temple that you can come to where you can get the word, right?
Yeah.
You can learn what you've been seeking your whole time. This is the place.
So why do younger people have this steeper? We usually see, what are the things maybe even in the culture of teaching that usually we see younger people get better on a much steeper learning.
Well, they're used to learning. They're at school.
Okay.
Number one. So they're surrounded by teachers teaching them things.
Right.
And they can't escape that. Whereas the adult is in the workplace, not necessarily being taught things.
Right.
Most of the time they're executing things. They've gone through university and they've got their degrees, etc. They've gone into the workplace, they've moved from job to job, and they're mostly about execution.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And then
they're not about learning a process and then executing that process. So the kids, if you say you got to grip it this way and blah, 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 they're already in that mindset of that's what things are about. Now, do they struggle any less than the adult? Nope, they struggle just as much. They top it. They do all sorts of things. Most of the kids will give up. The ones that keep playing, Brendan and Justin, are the ones that didn't give up. Let's be honest.
Yep.
The ones that play golf, adults, are the ones that didn't give up.
Mm-hmm.
Most are giving up. Most kids are giving up. Most adults are giving up. The ones you see playing are the ones who persist at it.
But Lawrie, wasn't there some
thing about growing the game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The number of golfers that are lost every year is crazy, and then usually, Brendan, it's this cycle, and then they sit the clubs sit in the garage. Yeah.
Let's face it, it's a hard game. It hasn't got any easier. I've been doing this for 60 years. No, 50 years.
What?
I've been doing it for 50 years.
Yeah.
It hasn't been easier in 50 years, right? There are a whole bunch of things to learn. There are principles to learn. Then you have to apply them. But adults can learn just as easily as kids. Kids have the environment. They're surrounded by people helping them to achieve goals in life. Adults can as well. They just don't get around teachers very often. And then maybe they get a very bad experience because maybe the first 3 golf teachers were bloody awful. They weren't very good at what they did.
And as you get older, it does get harder. As you get older, it does get harder to trust people who are teaching you things, and to convince yourself that this person is an actual expert.
Do you have any general guidelines for golfers to use when looking for a quote-unquote good instructor?
And then also with that, how to find a better instructor, how to find a good instructor, but also how to be a good student too, so that you get the most out of it.
I mean, that's so important, Brendan. That part there. I mean, how good are you at taking instruction? Well, again, you may have been out of school for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And maybe you don't read books much anymore. I read something a while back where, when most people leave formal education, that's the end of that. It's like, I don't want to read another book. I don't want to get into another textbook or, and some people feel forced when they're in the workplace and they have to go to some, continuing education type of program. They're not really happy because they feel like they're being forced to do something they don't want to do.
Right.
But if it's golf and you want to get better, that's different, right? The motivation's different. It's something you're not... See, as a kid, I work with a lot of parents who they're forcing their kids to do things. That's just a bottom line. They're saying, you'll do golf. And that kid doesn't want to do golf, but they'll do it. And then after a while, a parent will realize, kid doesn't like golf. We'll try tennis. Yeah. We'll try swimming. We'll try something else. And look, the parents have to find, they don't want the kids sitting on the couch playing games. They want them to be active, right? So, they've got that challenge. But when you become an adult and you have choice, you exercise choice. You choose what you want. It's not forced upon you anymore. So you just have to make good choices. And you're going to get it wrong. You're going to be very lucky if you go to the first instructor and Shazam, you've got it. This is the person.
Lawrie, what's a good metric to keep track of to know that you are getting better or you are getting worse? What's a good metric?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you're essentially saying, if I'm hearing you right, return on investment.
Yeah.
Right? Let's face it. As adults, everything becomes return on investment. If I invest something into this, I want to see a return. So, Brendan, what you're saying is, well, what should I expect for my investment?
Yeah.
Well, it's going to cost you likely, depending on who you go to, but it's going to cost you thousands of dollars to go in this exercise. You're going to struggle a lot to learn these things that your body doesn't know how to do, and then learn how to do it with a golf ball there. But you're going to learn it. So you need to be thinking big picture here, that this is not a short-term thing. You don't want to be going, well, I'm going to check this out for a month, and if it doesn't work for me, I'm out of here.
Yeah, right.
It's just not like that. It's as complex as learning, some sort of musical instrument that requires more than just one thing to do. Like guitar, you've got to strum or pick and move your fingers up and down a fretboard, and then play it with a tempo, and et cetera, et cetera. It takes time, and that's just got a few things going on. Golf's got an infinite number of things happening. So the problem is that a lot of people are going into their investment without a lot of understanding of just what is going to be in front of them, and it becomes this shocking.
But like in my mind, like personally, like in my mind, like I would like to be able to hit like 12 or more greens around. And if I'm a golfer that's hitting like 8, like is greens hit not really the thing I should be looking at? I be looking at something that would be like further back away from that, like maybe like certain numbers on a machine or something like that? Or what do you think?
You would definitely have benchmarks along the way. But the first thing is the skill learning, right? That's the performance side of things. So we've got three things we're dealing with in sport from a goals perspective. We've got the outcome goal, we've got the process goal, and we've got the performance goal. So the outcome goal is the thing you'd ultimately like to have that you can't, if it's winning a tournament, for instance, well, you can't control that. Everyone else has to lose for you to win. So they're nice to have things. And then you've got the process that you're going to go through each time you go and work on your game when you're not with the instructor, and to know what to do so that you're investing that time into your effort, but you actually know what to do. And then
those are good. The process goals are good because they're 100% in your control.
You bet.
Like I can control, that I'm going to go to the range a certain amount of times, or I'm going to get, there are things that you're in, you're in total, you're kind of what am I trying to say? The responsibility is yours. You can either do it or not.
Yeah, it's the performance goal. It's the one that's missing, Brendan. Most cases. That's the one that's missing. But it's not missing in business. If you are dealing with people who are in business, they understand very clearly about performance metrics, and that we have targets, whether a sales team or we have to hit a certain target, or a manager that has to hit, their team has to hit targets. But in golf, no, you just go and have lessons, and you keep having lessons, and you hope to get better. That's not going to cut it. That's why a lot of people walk away. They need to have small goals they've got the bigger goal that might be to get the wrist looking like this eventually, and they have to have smaller goals where they've achieved wrist deviation of X, and then and so all the way along they know where they're at, right? Because if you don't know where you are on the path, what have you got at the end of the day?
Yeah, that feedback's important, huh?
So you need performance goals. You need what are called lead measures or lead metrics, not just lag metrics. So many people are looking at lag data and going, "Oh, look at that! I'm averaging, eight fairways, and I'm averaging 9 greens per round. Fantastic, good. Based on that lag data, what do I want it to be, and when do I want it to be that?"
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, just normal people who want to be better, like I'm not talking elite here. I'm just saying someone who is transacting time and effort and money to improve some aspect of their game has to have someone who's going to help them to put in place some performance targets along the way so that they can both do a check. So we're going to go 1 month from now, this wrist position, let's say we want a flat wrist, and to do that, this right wrist, which is in a dorsal flex position, we want it, and it's currently like this, the wrist is like this. We want it to be a little bit better, and we have to have a way of measuring that angle. Let's, for instance, say. Now, I'm not saying that guarantees the player plays better, but that is the goal. Yeah. And then month 2, it's got a little bit more. And month 3, it's closer to where we want it to be. Mm-hmm. But at least the coach and the player on the same page. That doesn't happen enough. What happens is they go and they have instruction, stuff is said, stuff is done, and then they're left to their own devices. And then they come back and have another lesson the next week or the week after, whenever. And the whole idea is there's some inference that, well, you've gone and done the work. Let's see how that's going along. That's not good enough. If you go to top instructors, the one thing that they all have in common is they will make you accountable to the things you're doing. And you
some of the top guys that I've seen that have been real successful here in California, there's a few like this, where there's the instructor, but then they have an assistant, but the assistant doesn't all they do really is hang out and watch you do the drills, and take notes. George Genkas has a guy like this, and Butch has a guy like this, and some other people where you take the lesson from them, and then they have like games or or some guys like Noodles and things like that, where they just kind of set up your structured practice, and that ends up working out well. And then it's like whatever, it might be $500 to see the guy, but then to see the assistant would be like just like it's a group thing or something like that. And that ends up working well, because there is something about practicing but then having somebody's eyeballs on you while you're doing it. And that's one reason I think that kids get better, is because they have the parents and the dad or whatever like watching them, keeping them accountable all the time, that adults never have. You're just there on your own.
That's a big problem. You're right, Brent. You're left to your own devices until you have the next lesson, and it becomes this waiting game. Let's think. Let's be honest here. For so many of your listeners, it'll be, I get it. It's like a waiting game. I'm waiting to get better, and I'm just not sure when that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it's not that way. It should not be that way. That's not the way education is done. What do you do when you're at school? You are tested all the way along on what you know. Mm-hmm. Now, I know there's a big difference between learning a motor skill and learning a subject, but the idea is similar. You test the motor skill and you test where it's at, if they're making some sort of change in their technique, and then you have them accountable. And yes, you might have an instructor that works with them to help them to achieve that goal, and that's fine. But you could, in this day and age with technology so easily accessible, there are other ways you can do it. Certainly sending videos on a regular basis, but you just have to stick with what you're working on. Yeah. You want to get to that point.
This is something that Rory, he said to me recently. He's like, he wants to get to that point where the thing that he's working on, like if somebody shook him awake at 3 a.m. in the morning and said, swing a golf club, that thing, we've always been talking about the rest, that would be there then. It's not like I have to do a certain amount of drills and warm up and everything, and then I can kind of do it if I'm manufacturing. It's like, no, like that's your swing. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't want to take too much more of your time, Lawrie, because you've been so generous with your time so far. The one thing I wanted to ask you is, with that specifically, with that 100 ball drill where it's in the pot of 20s, do you have a video or article or something about this that shows exactly what you're talking about there, as far as like where you're allowed to look throughout the different stages?
I don't. I first learned a similar method to this, but I've modified it a great deal from a sports psychologist 30 years ago, by the name of a guy by the name of John Crampton, who's quite well known in Australia. And so he called it the eye control drill, which kind of, it had dual meaning of I control what I'm doing and my eyes are being controlled on what they're looking at. And what I did is I used that drill, and then I thought to myself, how can I deeply embed that into the players I work with? And it became a case of, I've got to increase the stroke volume. I've got to get them doing a lot more a lot more of the same thing to get to what you just mentioned about Rory, where you could just jump out of bed at 3 a.m. and boom, it happens, right?
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
I know the thing that I've learned from watching many, many golfers over the years, including very good golfers, is that there is quite often too much variation in their behavior leading into a golf shot and then as they're executing the shot. And that there is this, it's unstable in the sense that
Right.
the timing is stretched out from where it would be ideal at 1 second to 5 seconds. So the whole idea of that particular drill done the way I'm doing it is to improve their pre-shot routine process. But you could apply that to any number of different things.
Okay. Well, in a few weeks, when you have time, I'm going to ask you to write that down for me, and I'll publish it at BeBetterGolf.net. I think
Sure.
people would really like to see that.
Happy
Just
to
in
do
a,
that.
you know, write that down and we'll put it up there. Where
Right.
can people find out more about what you have going on in Indonesia and your
The
social
easiest
media
way
and everything?
is to find me on Instagram, Lawrie Montague. Easy, just plug my name in and you'll find me.
Okay, great. And Justin, we can find Justin at, what is your Instagram, Justin? Elite Golf Swing?
That's right. Elite Golf Swing on Instagram.
Yeah, Justin has a big account there, and he's going to start to put up some of his personal instruction and stuff on there as well from Singapore. Yeah. Thanks so much, Lawrie, and everybody go follow him on Instagram, and stay tuned. We'll be doing some more stuff with Lawrie in the future. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Lawrie.